What's up, Football Daily? We've done a lot of videos highlighting our standout players and performances of the season over the last week. So here's our team of Premier League players who had seasons to forget in 2022-23. Goalkeeper, Danny Ward. Having seen declining club legend Kasper Schmeichel leave Leicester after 10 years, and with no replacement brought in, Danny Ward was thrust into the Foxes' number one slot, having not had a role as a starting keeper since 2016-17 while on loan at Huddersfield Town. So the fact he endured a nightmare campaign at the King Power, especially when the performance of the defence in front of him left a lot to be desired, shouldn't come as a huge surprise. But with the Foxes now back in the Championship for the first time in almost a decade, it's hard not to look at the club's failure to recruit a seasoned top-flight professional in goal as one of the key reasons for their demise. Among regular starters in the Prem, only youngsters Gavin Bazunu and Ilan Meslier have failed to keep out more savable shots than the 29-year-old, according to post-shot expected goals, while his save percentage is also among the worst in the division. And away from the numbers, the Welsh stoppers often look zapped of confidence between the sticks, struggling to close down opposition strikers in one-on-ones and breeding little confidence in those playing in front of him. Dropped by Brendan Rodgers just before he was sacked, it's not a surprise Dean Smith chose against reinstating him. Defender, Adam Smith. A stalwart of the Eddie Howe era at Bournemouth, Adam Smith was one of the Cherries' most reliable performers during their 5-year stay in the Premier League in the second half of the 2010s. But despite them staying up against the odds this season, and despite the right-back playing more minutes than anyone in the squad bar Jefferson Lerma this term, his decline has been evident. Once one of the Prem's most underrated fullbacks, Smith's best campaign was back in 2016-17, when he provided a team-high 5 assists as one of the most foul players in the division, aiding an attack that fired Bournemouth to their first ever finish in the top half. But Smith now looks well past his best at 32, part of a defence that conceded more than in any top-flight season under Howe, and having lost his attacking powers too. Whereas he once used to carry the ball upfield around 3 times a match, he now completes just 0.9 progressive carries per 90, suggesting he's no longer able to keep up with the pace of the Prem like he used to, while 2.6 tackles and interceptions a match, the worst showing of his top-flight career, also backs this up. If Gary O'Neill wants to keep them up again next term, he should find a replacement. Defender, Kalidou Koulibaly. In truth, we could have constructed almost this entire team out of Chelsea players, given they treated us to their biggest underperformance of any side of the Premier League era, and while there is more to come, we have shown some restraint for the purposes of this video. In truth, Kalidou Koulibaly arrived in the Premier League a few years too late. The Senegalese centre-half was showing signs of decline even before leaving Napoli, becoming less involved in build-up and making fewer challenges in his final year in Italy. And so handing the 31-year-old a 4-year contract and making one of the 2 highest paid players at Stamford Bridge wasn't a wise move. And he struggled to adapt in a dysfunctional side, making major errors with the kind of frequency not seen before in his esteemed career. With Benoit Badiashile and Wesley Fofana the future of Chelsea's backline, and the impressive Levi Colwill primed for a return, Koulibaly's future as a starter already looks in doubt. And to make matters worse, he's had to watch his former teammates in Naples lift the long-awaited Scudetto his Serie A career deserved. Defender, Wout Faes. Another example of Leicester failing to adequately replace a departing star, Wout Faes' £15 million fee represented a small fraction of the £75 million they agreed to sell Wesley Fofana to Chelsea for. And to be fair to the Foxes' recruitment team, he initially looked like a steal, impressing in the early weeks of the campaign, keeping clean sheets in 6 of his first 9 appearances. However, Leicester conceded in each of his following 20 games, with 2 own goals in 6 minutes against Liverpool foreshadowing a calamitous second half of the campaign. Faes and by extension the Leicester backline looked increasingly shaky after that, as they plummeted back into the relegation zone. Errors aplenty, low defensive output and very little in the way of ball progression to compensate, Faes simply didn't offer enough in a nightmare season at the King Power. Defender, Junior Firpo. You were probably wondering why you hadn't seen a Leeds player in the backline up until now, but better late than never. Junior Firpo sadly never lived up to the hype that surrounded him during an impressive spell under Quique Setien at Real Betis, failing to make his mark at Barcelona and now Leeds, where the prospect of working under another maverick in Marcelo Bielsa gave fans promise on his arrival in 2021. But 2 years later, and Firpo's poor performances have contributed to one of the most leaky defences seen in the Premier League in years. With Pascal Struijk preferred to him at left-back for the first half of the season, the former Barca man was brought back into the side following Jesse Marsch's sacking but did little to justify it. A match-winning performance against Southampton in February was an anomaly in an otherwise miserable few months for the left-back, who despite being one of the side's most aggressive defenders with almost 5 tackles and interceptions per 90, was actually pretty weak in the tackle, winning under half his duels. He also saw his influence on the ball drop to an all-time low, making fewer progressive carries than at any point in his career, while a calamitous display against Newcastle, in which he gave away a penalty with a handball and almost gave away a second with a last-man challenge, effectively robbed Leeds of a vital 3 points. Midfield, Fabinho. Liverpool came close to redeeming their terrible first half of the season by finishing just short of a Champions League spot, and a 7-game winning run between April and May suggests they should come back stronger next term. But one player who's looked particularly poor across the season is Fabinho. Once one of the Premier League's fiercest and most consistent defensive midfielders, he looked a shadow of his former self in 22-23, letting games pass him by and becoming increasingly dominated by opposing midfielders. Seemingly losing his defensive tenacity and looking fatigued for large periods of the campaign, the Brazilian infamously won just 1 tackle across 8 games before the World Cup, while his declining mobility saw him less able to cover the backline, with his tackles in the defensive third falling to a career low. Form that eventually saw him dropped, albeit briefly, for 18-year-old Stefan Bajcetic. Given the rest of Jurgen Klopp's midfield also fell apart in the first 6 months of the season and the injury he was rushed back from at the end of the previous campaign, there are certainly some mitigating factors in Fabinho's steep decline. But with the Reds posting their worst defensive record in 7 years, and midfield the priority in this summer's window, Fabinho's place could be under threat. Midfield, Remo Freuler. One of the most highly regarded signings of Nottingham Forest transfer frenzy on returning to the Premier League, Remo Freuler had been one of the key players of Atalanta's entertaining assault on Italian and European football at the turn of the decade, even captaining Gianpiero Gasperini's side for much of his final season in Bergamo. The Swiss international seemed to possess both the experience and technical prowess to help upgrade the Forest midfield as they chased survival against the odds. But instead he proved one of their weakest links as they became increasingly reliant on Morgan Gibbs-White and Brennan Johnson to secure safety, struggling to make the switch from the tactical versatility and high-tempo possession play of Atalanta to the very different reality of a newly promoted side in the Prem made up almost entirely of new players under a rookie manager. Freuler rarely got hold of games and saw his output drop across the board. Not only did his progressive passes plummet from around 8 to just over 2 per 90, but his defensive contribution also decreased, with his 3 tackles and interceptions per 90 lower than in any season in Italy. He certainly has the capability to find his feet in his second season, but there is also the fear that now 31, Freuler may have arrived in the Prem a couple of years too late. Midfield, Felipe Coutinho. Following an inspired loan move to Aston Villa midway through last season, which yielded 5 goals and 3 assists from 16 starts, Coutinho's subsequent permanent switch to the Midlands outfit couldn't have gone much worse. Like much of the Villa team, he started the season poorly, and this form helped contribute to his former Liverpool teammate Steven Gerrard getting sacked in October. For the first time in a decade, Coutinho's take-on success rate fell to well below 50%, and as a result he became fairly ineffective as a ball carrier, a role he used to excel in, with his 2.1 progressive carries per 90 a career low. Mustering just 1 goal against Arsenal in February before injury ruled him out of the rest of the campaign, Coutinho's absence from the Villa squad has coincided with some of their best form in years, with Unai Emery's side winning 10 and losing just twice in their final 15 games of the campaign. Ending the season with just 7 Premier League starts, Coutinho's time at the top level is in danger of ending with a whimper. Forward, Richarlison. Arguably the most underwhelming big money signing of the season, Richarlison arrived at Tottenham last summer with the promise of providing serious backup to Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, but didn't register a Premier League goal until the end of April. Given that Son also saw his attacking output decrease significantly this term, Richarlison's lack of impact hurt Spurs' hopes of Champions League qualification more than many would have expected. And while he was hardly helped by playing a fair amount of time on the right, where he's never been particularly effective, by almost all accounts he had an incredibly poor campaign. Assuming most of the creative role and forced into more defensive work than usual, Richarlison's shots per 90 dropped to their lowest since he was a teenager, failing to even register an effort on goal in 11 of his 26 Premier League appearances. Unless Kane leaves, it's hard to see Richarlison recapturing his best form at Spurs. Forward, Neal Maupay. Signed to compensate for the loss of Richarlison at Everton, Neal Maupay arrived at Goodison Park with a reputation for missing gilt-edged chances, but had nevertheless proved himself a decent goalscorer at Brentford and Brighton. It didn't feel like he'd be such a good fit in an Everton side where scoring chances comes at a premium, but weirdly he was actually getting on the end of better opportunities than at Brighton, with his efforts coming a full yard closer to goal on average at Goodison Park compared to his previous club. But he was more wasteful than ever, scoring just once from over 5 expected goals. Unable to provide much physicality or creativity himself, with defensive midfielder Amadou Onana averaging more key passes per game, it's little wonder he was afforded just 4 starts after Sean Dyche's appointment. Forward, Raheem Sterling. One of the defining Premier League attackers of the last decade, we did not expect Raheem Sterling to be in contention for a video like this before he'd even hit 29 years of age. But here he is, having seen his performances drop off a cliff amidst Chelsea's calamity of a season. Having hit at least 18 goals and assists in his final 5 league campaigns at Man City, 9 goal involvements in 22-23 is of course well below par for the Englishman, whose 0.49 expected goals and assists per 90 represented a huge decline from 0.82 last year. It's not entirely his fault. He began the season at centre forward before being deployed in a number of positions including wing-back by Graham Potter, and so it perhaps isn't too surprising that he's been taking more touches in his own half than ever before. And given his style of play became streamlined at City in order to maximise his goal output, carrying the ball less often and creating fewer chances as years went by, it was particularly concerning to see his shots fall to under 2 a game at Stamford Bridge, only good enough for 7th in the squad. One bad season after many brilliant ones isn't a disaster in itself, but having missed out on the latest England squad, Sterling needs to regain his powers next season. So guys, that was our rundown of the worst team of the season 11. What did you guys think of it? I'm sure there were numerous candidates that we missed out, so who would you have included? Let me know in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to Football Daily, and I'll catch you later in the week.